Hello and welcome to China Forum, the leading program for discussing the latest in trends and development in modern Chinese culture, politics, economics, and social issues. My name is Shannon Tiezi, and I'll be your moderator for our program today. Today on China Forum, we'll be discussing U.S.-China relations under Chinese President Xi Jinping and President Barack Obama. We're happy to welcome Ambassador J. Stapleton Roy to discuss this topic with us today. Ambassador Roy is a distinguished scholar and the founding director emeritus of the Kissinger Institute on China and the United States at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Roy joined the U.S. Foreign Service immediately after graduating from Princeton in 1956, retiring 45 years later with the rank of Career Ambassador, the highest in the service. In 1978, he participated in the secret negotiations that led to the establishment of U.S.-PRC diplomatic relations. During a career focused on East Asia and the Soviet Union, his ambassadorial assignments included Singapore, China, and Indonesia. His final post with the State Department was as Assistant Secretary for Intelligence and Research. On retirement, he joined Kissinger Associates, Inc., a strategic consulting firm, before joining the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars in September 2008 to head the newly created Kissinger Institute. Ambassador Roy, we're so glad you could join us today.
Nice to be here.
The U.S.-China relationship is often described as one of the most important bilateral relationships in the world. There have been a lot of changes in both the U.S. and Chinese governments in 2013, with President Xi Jinping taking control of China and President Barack Obama appointing new cabinet members and policy advisors. Ambassador Roy, to provide a little bit of background, could you go over with us the achievements and maybe the setbacks of President Obama's relationship with China during his first term? Are there any things that stand out in your mind as particularly noteworthy?
Yes, there are. You mentioned how important the overall relationship is, but the relationship takes place on different tracks. And some of the tracks may be moving in a positive direction while other tracks are moving in a less positive direction. And this was the case during President Obama's first term. They made a special effort to avoid the difficulties of earlier administrations who have made policy errors in their first year in office in dealing with China. So the first year of President Obama's administration, in his first term, went rather smoothly. But then in the second year, we made an arms sale to Taiwan, and the president met with the Dalai Lama as a religious leader. This was in the wake of the global financial crisis, and China had recovered from the crisis much more rapidly than the United States. And the Chinese were feeling their oats, and they felt that the United States should be paying greater respect to their interests. And so the confrontation with China over the arms sales, which of course we've made repeatedly over the last 30 years, and over the Dalai Lama meeting, were sharper than it had been in the Bush administration. So that was a setback in the second year. But then President Obama visited Beijing in November of 2009. And that was a positive development, preceding the negative developments that I've just described. And another positive development was when President Hu Jintao made a reciprocal visit to the United States in February of 2011. But prior to that, at a meeting of the ASEAN Regional Forum in Hanoi, the disputes between China and neighboring countries in Southeast Asia had become a sharp topic of controversy. And the United States had made statements that China felt were interfering in the problem between China and the other claimant countries to the islands in the South China Sea. So that was a negative development. On some, though, I think that the overall relationship between China and the United States developed in a positive fashion during President Obama's first term. The underlying problem was that the strategic rivalry between our two countries was becoming more intense. And this is a subject that has become a much more important issue in the second term of President Obama.
Now, President Obama was reelected, but there still has been a lot of turnover on the U.S. government side over the past year. We saw Secretary of State Hillary Clinton step down to be replaced by John Kerry. Secretary of Defense Leon Panetta also stepped down, was replaced by Chuck Hagel. What sort of impact will having these new faces involved in the relationship have on U.S.-China ties?
Sometimes changes in personnel can make a big difference in terms of policies. In this particular case, I don't think that is the case. First of all, the China policy is President Obama's policy. And unless he changes the policy, the officials in his administration will have the general guidelines regarding the direction in which we want the U.S.-China relationship to move, remaining as they were before. Secondly, Secretary Kerry is a highly experienced foreign policy person. He was the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for many years. When I was serving in Asia, I met him on several occasions. And so he has a background in East Asia, which I think will lend stability to the carrying out of the policy. Senator Hagel, now Secretary of Defense Hagel, is also an experienced Asia hand. And I have been in meetings with him, and the way that he has talked about the U.S. position in East Asia and our relationship with China has struck me as a career U.S. diplomat as very well informed and understanding the underlying issues and the direction in which the policy should move. Within the State Department, the official who replaced Assistant Secretary Kirk Campbell, who was the Assistant Secretary during President Obama's first term, came over from the NSC, where for several years he had first been the principal deputy to Jeff Bader, who was the senior advisor on Asia, and later moved up to become the senior advisor on Asia in the National Security Council. So there's continuity there. The person who took his position at the National Security Council is Evan Medeiros. Evan Medeiros is a highly respected and China hand who had been working closely with both Jeff Bader and Danny Russell. So that I think that the team that is in place is both highly competent and fully conversant with the details of the policy that President Obama has been pursuing during his 4+ years in office.
Mm-hmm. So new faces, but maybe more continuity than change there.
At the moment, I think that that's exactly the right way to describe it. Okay. It's continuity rather than change.
Well, let's look at the Chinese side. Obviously, they went through a fairly sizable leadership exchange with President Hu Jintao stepping down and being replaced by President Xi Jinping, Wen Jiabao, the premier, also stepping down, and Li Keqiang assuming his role. Are they also in that position of new faces but keeping the same basic policy, or are there any signals that they might want to change the way China approaches the U.S.?
A very good question. The way I would characterize it is this. There is a change in the way that China sees its position in the world. During President Obama's first term, China recovered rapidly from the impact of the global financial crisis. Its GDP overtook that of Japan. It now has the second largest GDP in the world, and it's catching up with the United States very rapidly in terms of the gross size of its gross domestic product. In per capita terms, China is still way behind the United States in terms of per capita GDP. But in terms of overall GDP, China is now a very major economy in the world. And this is affecting China's view of itself and the role that it is playing in the world. And one can sense that feeling on China's part that it's catching up with the United States more rapidly than it had thought it would because of the impact of the global financial crisis. So that's one aspect. The second aspect is that China clearly feels that it cannot achieve its development goals successfully and rapidly unless it has a good relationship with the United States. So the signals from the Chinese side that they still attach keen importance to trying to keep the U.S.-China relationship moving in a positive direction have been very evident since President Xi Jinping became the top leader in China. The third point, however, I mentioned the strategic rivalry that has been driving one aspect of our relationship in the wrong direction, with the potential to turn a positive cooperative relationship into one marked by vicious rivalry. And this has emerged as a serious issue, and President Xi Jinping has been in the forefront of calling for the creation of a new type of great power relationship between the United States and China, which can avoid the historic problem of rising states such as China coming into rivalry with established powers such as the United States. And in many cases in the past, that has resulted in conflict. And so President Xi Jinping has put forward the concept of having a relationship with the United States in which there is no conflict, no confrontation, mutual respect, and mutually beneficial cooperation, or win-win cooperation is the term that they use. We use different words to describe that, but essentially we have endorsed the goal of trying to have a relationship between our two countries that brings this strategic rivalry under control. We're at the very beginning of trying to accomplish that, and there's not very good understanding in East Asia or elsewhere in the world as to what we mean by this new type of great power relationship. Is this going to be a G2 type of relationship in which the United States and China set rules that others are expected to follow? Absolutely not. We don't want a G2 relationship with China. China doesn't want a G2 relationship with us. All of our friends and neighbors in East Asia don't want that type of relationship between the United States and China. What we're trying to do is to ensure that our relationship with China is not driven toward vicious hostility by the strategic rivalry between our two countries. And bringing that under control, which will necessarily require changes in the way that our two militaries interact with each other, is a major challenge, and President Xi has set that challenge as one of his top policy priorities, as has President Obama.
And speaking of the military engagements, we've actually seen a fair number of high-level exchange visits between the U.S. and China. You had General Martin Dempsey, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the U.S., visiting China. You also had the Chinese Defense Minister, Chang Wan-chun, visiting the U.S. So it seems like like you said, it's a top priority for both the China and the U.S. Do you think these visits are really helping to achieve the goal of more mutual trust, less strategic rivalry?
The answer is it's a very good start. We developed our military-to-military relationship quite rapidly in the 1980s. But then, because of developments in 1989, we essentially severed regular contacts between our two military forces. And frankly, up until recently, our military-to-military relationship with China has not developed. It's lagged way behind the other aspects of our relations. In the political, economic, social, educational sphere, there's been enormous expansion of our bilateral relationship. In the military sphere, very little. This is potentially dangerous when you're dealing with countries that have normal great power rivalry as an important part of their relationship. Now, we began to address this question in the latter years of President George W. Bush, President Obama's immediate predecessor. But it moved very slowly during President Obama's first term. And it is now picking up steam. In fact, the exchanges that are taking place between our two militaries are the most frequent and at the highest levels since the 1980s. And I think this is a very positive development because our two militaries need to get to know each other better and get a better understanding of how each looks at the security problems of East Asia. And you can't do that if you don't sit down with somebody and have an opportunity to have an exchange of views. That's taking place now.
Right. The military aspect of President Obama's rebalancing to Asia, also known as the pivot to Asia, has made China very nervous in the past couple of years. Do you think these sorts of dialogues are going to be enough to alleviate the Chinese concerns that the U.S. rebalancing to Asia means more military support for Japan, the Philippines, other potential rivals for China?
Very good question, and it's one that everybody asks. First of all, we created some confusion by the terminology we use to describe our policy position. Many people described it as a pivot to Asia, which suggested that we hadn't been there and now we were turning attention to East Asia. Now I think the favored terminology is this concept of rebalancing. I think what we're really talking about is something that in my judgment is very important and positive, but that the Chinese are less inclined to see as positive, although in my judgment it is very much in their interest. If China continues to grow rapidly and become stronger and more prosperous, it is going to create concern on the part of big, small, important countries around China. They are much more comfortable cooperating with China when they feel that there is a big, strong country such as the United States that is a reliable, long-term, sustainable presence in East Asia. We are facing budgetary difficulties, and we may be drawing down our military presence in other parts of the world. If we draw down our military presence in East Asia at a time when China is continuing to grow and getting stronger, it is going to have a destabilizing impact on East Asia and is going to make China's continued rise more disturbing to the countries around China. And that's not in China's interest, and it's not in our interest, because we don't want East Asia to become polarized. What the rebalancing strategy really is an expression of determination by the United States to keep our presence in East Asia sufficiently strong so that China can continue to rise peacefully without destabilizing the region. And for that reason, the countries of East Asia, by and large, have welcomed this because they want the United States to play that role. Unfortunately, some of our political difficulties, which forced President Obama to skip a very important meeting out in East Asia, are raising questions in the minds of our East Asian friends and allies as to whether or not the United States political system is going to enable the United States to play that balancing role on a sustainable basis in the future. I, frankly, as an American familiar with the strengths and weaknesses of my country, am absolutely confident that we have that capability and the determination and will to do it. But we are sending confusing signals to our friends and allies in East Asia, and that potentially is dangerous in terms of U.S. foreign policy interests in the region. So I think it really is a very high priority for the United States to try to bring our domestic house into order so that we can use our enormous strength and prosperity in ways that serve our longer-term interests in having a prosperous and peaceful East Asia in which the United States and China are by and large working together rather than against each other.
Mm-hmm. And when we talk about Obama having to cancel his trip to the Asia Pacific, most of U.S. media was analyzing that as a victory for China, that the fact that the U.S. wasn't present at those meetings, at least not represented at the presidential level, meant that Xi Jinping was able to garner more support for China's policies. Do you think that, is that an accurate way of looking at the situation, that when the U.S. withdraws, it's China's gain in that field?
Yes, but we're talking about a small development in a big process. Yes, the absence of President Obama from an important meeting at which he had been expected to be present caused the spotlight to focus on President Xi Jinping of China, And he was very effective in taking advantage of that opportunity. But the Chinese look at history in long-range terms. And if we look at the process we're talking about in East Asia, I would say this is a small glitch in a process which I'm confident will move in the right direction. I think that the president has not lost interest in East Asia. Don't forget, this president spent part of his childhood in East Asia. So he's intimately familiar with the region. And he has, in all of his actions and words, showed that he is continued to be interested in the region. So the fact that our domestic political circumstances forced him to skip this meeting, in my judgment, is not an indication that our rebalancing strategy is not sustainable.
And we've talked a lot about the military and more strategic aspects of the relationship, but historically, a lot of people think the economic level of the relationship is really the bedrock and the foundation. But China is undergoing its own economic rebalancing and reform policies. Do you think this has the potential to destabilize economic relations between the U.S. and China?
Yes, it has that potential. And I think smart leaders in both countries will try to not let that happen. In China's case, its rapid economic growth has changed the nature of China's domestic population. You now have large middle classes in China who are educated, are in regular contact with the middle classes in the countries around them, and who are much better informed than Chinese have been able to be in the past because of the speed with which information can now flow over the internet and through electronic media. And so this is influencing attitudes in China. And China, in order to keep its economy competitive in a globalized world where competition is now taking place on a global basis, has to make economic reforms which will keep its economy able to compete in this global economic world. That is what we're expecting to happen this fall. A very important meeting of the top leaders of the Chinese Communist Party will take place in November of this year. And it's expected that at that meeting, an economic reform package will be presented, which will be designed to deal with these types of questions. I think that's a very important development because China cannot continue to grow rapidly without changing both its economic system and adapting it to the new circumstances. And in my judgment, there have to be changes in the political system as well, but they don't have to occur at exactly the same time. If we look at other countries in East Asia who have gone through a process of rapid growth, we have seen political changes. But in many cases, they haven't occurred for 30 or 40 years because it takes time to create the circumstances that make the changes necessary. The United States faces a similar challenge. We are dreaming if we think that the financial crisis did not expose the fact that there are deficiencies in our financial sector and in the way our economy is performing. We should not have the type of recurrent crises that we have had over the last 20 years in our economic and financial sector. It's a sign that our regulatory system is not properly adapted to the requirements of our system. And in my judgment, the changes we have made are still only a small part of what needs to be done to ensure that we have the economic and financial competitiveness to maintain our economic and financial strength in the world. So I think that it's a mistake for us to think, well, China has to make economic reforms, but all we have to do is go back to the old ways. That's a very dangerous way, in my judgment, of looking at the challenges that our country is facing.
The region of East Asia has a lot of opportunities for economic growth. A lot of the countries, not just China, but Vietnam and other countries in the region are growing very rapidly. So it's a lot of opportunity, but also it can become sort of an economic competition. There's been a lot of talk about the U.S.-led Trans-Pacific Partnership, that free trade agreement, which at least at this point would exclude China, and then China's own free trade agreements as somehow being in competition with each other. Do you think that these competing economic agreements have the potential to cause more diplomatic tension between the U.S. and China?
I think the best circumstance is where all of the competing economies are operating within common ground rules. And those ground rules, in my judgment, are best if they permit the proper competition among economic systems necessary for comparative advantage to make itself felt properly. In other words, one country will have cheaper labor and will be able to take advantage of that. But then another country may begin to take that advantage away, because as you grow based on cheap labor, your labor costs start going up, and then other countries have opportunities. This is exactly the way it should be. And I remember when I was ambassador in Singapore, an American company decided to move its operations from Singapore to Malaysia. And when I discussed this with the Singapore side, their response was, that's exactly what that company should do, because Singapore's economic future cannot be based on companies located in Singapore who would be more competitive if they located in a neighboring country. That's the type of thinking I don't hear enough of in the United States. This is how we grew as a country. We took advantage of our comparative advantages, but we noticed that when the Japanese cars started coming in and competing with ours, it turned out that we had let the technology of our cars slip. And the Japanese competition has now made American cars much better than they used to be. That's exactly how countries move up the economic ladder. The problem is, it affects jobs. So you have to retrain workers, and you have to create new jobs. And you do that through innovation and by being open to the outside world. If you protect your jobs, you will end up lagging behind the rest of the world, and that means you have to become increasingly protective, and that's the way to become a declining country.
We have about 1 minute left, so I'd just like to ask what you're looking for to happen in the next couple of years. What do you think are the best steps that the U.S. and China can take to put their relationship on a solid footing?
Well, I think we're on the right track. I really think the rebalancing strategy, and the reason I like the term rebalancing is because I was serving as ambassador in Indonesia when the 1997 Asian financial crisis occurred. And as a result of that crisis, Asia began over a decade-long process of creating new institutions in Asia. We didn't pay enough attention to that. And we also focused on China and the North Korea problem and didn't pay enough attention to Southeast Asia. The rebalancing strategy, in my judgment, does not simply involve maintaining our strength in East Asia. It also involves making sure that we are paying adequate attention to the southern part of East Asia and not simply focusing on the northern part. And I think that's exactly what we're doing. It's the right direction to go in, but getting this new relationship with China right is going to be a real challenge.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for joining us and helping us work through these issues. It's been a pleasure, Ambassador Roy.
Thank you.
And thank you for tuning in at home. We'll see you next week on China Forum.